All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the Counter Narrative Project presents Building Resilience Among Black Gay Men in the South. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Johnny Cornegay, Director of Digital Strategy and Stakeholder Engagement for the Counter Narrative Project, and I will be your moderator. The vision for the Counter Narrative Project is to build power among Black gay men. We see art and culture as movement building strategies. We are committed to cultural change as a vehicle for social change, and our work is rooted in the belief that our stories change hearts, minds, and ultimately society. You can visit our website at thecounternarrative.org and follow us on Twitter at Building Desire. You can also like us on Facebook at The Counter Narrative Project. During the duration of this conversation, you'll see that information at the bottom of your screen for you to use. As for our agenda today, we'll have introductions and then we will have presentations by our speakers. We'll then have questions from me to the speakers on this particular webinar, and then we'll have Q&A from all of you who are joining us today. You will be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but you can in fact ask questions. So to ask questions, you want to expand the questions button, which is on your screen. It should be on your control panel. You'll go ahead and expand that. You'll type your question here in the type question here section, and then you will press send. Finally, please tweet during the webinar using the hashtag BlackGayJoy. Included in the handouts section of your control panel are two memes from the Counter Narrative Project that will appear during the presentation. Please feel free to download them along with other supporting material that will be covered today. Please remember to use the hashtag BlackGayJoy. So resilience. According to Psychology Today, resilience is that ineffable quality that allows some people to be knocked down by life and come back stronger than ever. Rather than letting failure overcome them and drain their resolve, they find a way to rise from the ashes. So today, where are we with Black gay men and the social and healthcare impacts on our community? According to a 2014 Washington Post article, the escalating HIV rates are the result of a perfect storm of social factors such as poverty, persistent anti-gay attitudes, and a lack of transportation in rural areas. And in the South, AIDS often still has the taint of the plague. Fear of being judged and ostracized keeps some people away from clinics and the care that they need. Just yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released a study noting that 1 in 2 Black men who have sex with men will be diagnosed with HIV in their lifetime. And that concentration is heavy in our deep South states, including Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Alabama. Both the Washington Post and CDC documents are included as handouts as well in that handout section. You may download them along with the memes that we mentioned earlier. So in our recent history, we've continued to watch rising HIV rates in the Black gay community, as we just discussed, but despite those facts, we're still here to champion change. So a couple of questions to consider during this webinar. What programming can be implemented today? How can the Black gay community organize around possibility? And what cultural and social factors impact resilience? We will hear presentations from our speakers discussing these topics and more as part of this webinar. Joining us today, we have Charles Stevens. Charles is a writer and activist. He is the founder and executive director of the Counter Narrative Project and co-editor of the anthology Black Gay Genius, Answering Joseph Beam's Call. His writing has also appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, Lambda Literary Review, Creative Loafing, RH Reality Check, and the Gay and Lesbian Review, as well as Alternet and Wiretap. Next, we have Aisha McAdams Mahmood. Aisha is currently a doctoral student at Harvard University's T.H. Chan School of Public Health, where she studies social and behavioral sciences with a focus on health communication and mental health. She received her master's in public health from Emory University and has worked as a behavioral scientist, strategic health communication specialist, and qualitative researcher for the past 8 years domestically and internationally. Before working on response efforts to handle health disparities, HIV, hepatitis C, and intimate partner violence in public health, she worked as a journalist and performing artist. And finally, we have Brian Glover. Brian is an award-winning theater producer, filmmaker, writer, and spiritual activist. He was recently named one of 12 fellows in the 2015 through 2017 inaugural cohort of the Field Leadership Fund in New York City, an initiative to impact diversity and equity in the arts sector. Brian served as a founding board member of Freedom Train Productions, the groundbreaking Black LGBT theater company based in Brooklyn. In addition, he is a leadership and life coach, supporting his clients in saying yes to a life of joy, passion, and possibilities. So thank you for all of our presenters. Our first presenter today is going to be Charles Stevens. Charles, I have unmuted you for the presentation. Can we hear you?
Yes.
All right, so thank you so much. Our first presenter will be Charles Stevens, and Charles will be talking about the CDC study as well as other topics. Thank you.
I suppose my portion of the webinar was, in a sense, a kind of interruption of our regularly scheduled webinar. So we decided that it was important to create a space in our webinar to just also reflect on and connect to the study that was released. Yes, it has been kind of making its way around the media. That being said, I hate to be a sort of Black gay killjoy, but since the webinar is focused on resilience, but again, this is, and our hashtag is Black gay joy. But yeah, but I think what we can also recognize is that there can also be joy in recognizing the immense obstacles that we experience and face. Next slide, please. So I just want to, again, highlight some of what's been reported in the study that the CDC released, and again, some of the points that are making their way around the media that folks have been grappling with. So yeah, the CDC released a new study that looking at lifetime estimates of HIV vulnerability and acquisition based on race. It appears that for the foreseeable future, Black, gay men, and other vulnerable communities will continue to bear the brunt of the HIV epidemic. Gay and bisexual men overall have the highest lifetime risk of an HIV diagnosis, which is to suggest that 1 in 2 Black, gay, and bisexual men will acquire HIV in their lifetime. And that's just, and you can compare that to other groups. And just to highlight, like white MSM, it's 1 in 11. The chances of being diagnosed with HIV is highest in the South, along with Washington, D.C., which I guess is geographically still the South. So I think it also reinforces the importance of us to also be thinking about the South and how geography also impacts access to healthcare and other the other social forces related to vulnerability around HIV acquisition. Next slide, please. For quite some time, the public health community has understood that the vulnerability of HIV acquisition for Black gay men is not necessarily related to sexual behaviors, but more structural factors. So they look at things like lack of access to healthcare, economic distress, stigma, barriers to healthcare access overall. So those forces contribute to the vulnerability of HIV acquisition for Black gay men, and it's not so much related specifically to riskier sexual behaviors, you might say. It's also worth noting that there's also conversation in the public health community around this notion of sexual networks, and that essentially for Black gay men, they're just much more likely to come in contact with HIV within their sexual network. So they're just so that also contributes to the HIV acquisition. I also want to highlight another finding that Black men overall are 7 times more likely than white men to be diagnosed with HIV in their lifetime. So that's just sort of capturing the major message of the study and of the media around it. Next slide, please. What I hope to highlight, just for my portion of this webinar, is just to talk a bit about the political implications for these findings, and really for the conversation overall. It appears that, at least from my perspective, when the study came out and started, making its rounds, a lot of us, I think, felt a sense of, and I say us, I mean Black gay men especially, I think there was a sense of disempowerment and a sense of sadness. I think this study and the attention around it, this narrative, if you will, is very much in conversation with other narratives that we've heard around our experience, this sort of sense of here we go again. And what I hope that happens is that we don't just accept the statistics as they are or just rely singularly on clinical interventions and approaches, although, again, the clinical approaches are important and significant, but we also see this as an opportunity to build power, as a call to action, as a way to think differently about what's happening, a way to defamiliarize what appears to be all too familiar, which is the impact and vulnerability of HIV on our communities. It's not enough to accept the social failure that's representative of the impact of HIV on Black gay men and the poor health outcomes for Black gay men living with HIV. We can't accept it the way it is, that we absolutely have to use this as an opportunity to build power and to do movement building, particularly in the South. And that being said, I just want to offer some perspective on paths forward with how we think about not only a policy response or clinical response, but a political response. For one thing, we absolutely need to be thinking about coalition building across social justice movements. The impact of HIV on Black gay men and other vulnerable communities is nothing short of a racial justice issue. We cannot afford to absolutely think about the impact of racism and how racism and other forms of structural violence contribute to the vulnerability that Black gay men face, related to HIV, but also other health access to healthcare issues as well. That being said, if we are to think about HIV as also a racial justice issue and a larger social justice issue, that also presents an opportunity for us to build coalitions across other social justice and racial justice movements. That the struggle against racism is very much has everything to do with the ways that HIV impacts our communities, and that opportunity is to build bridges and to also work with other allies and partners that are working to end racism. Two, we also need to be thinking about messaging, the ways that messaging, not only to raise awareness around HIV, but also, again, to build power as a way to shift consciousness. Messages such as get tested and things like that, though, again, there's value in that because those things are important. We also need messaging that stirs people, that wakes us up, that actually speaks to the hearts and minds of the communities impacted. The narratives around HIV, particularly as it relates to many of the more popular social marketing campaigns, again, when they're not stigmatizing or disempowering Black gay men, they don't often speak to the lived experiences that we face. So the messaging absolutely has to deal with issues such as racism and social justice issues, because that's ultimately what it is. We have to reframe the messaging. The impact of HIV on Black gay men represents an institutional failure of not only healthcare institutions, but many of the institutions that are supposed to protect vulnerable communities. Thus, we have to hold institutions accountable for failing to address the institutional barriers that make it difficult for Black gay men and other vulnerable communities to access services or navigate the institutions. I know there's been a lot of work, particularly around things like cultural competence, to better equip healthcare providers with the skills and tools to, to reach the communities that they serve, but that's not enough. Obviously, there has to be institutional reform, particularly with healthcare institutions, that service, especially Black gay men, so that we can see better access to healthcare. I mean, and furthermore, I think often the conversation around, like why are Black gay men especially, the challenges with Black gay men remaining in care, very too often the conversation falls back on Black gay men, like, well, why are you not staying in care and things like that. But we have to look at the institutions, we have to look at institutional policies, we have to look at the environment that the healthcare is taking place, and then and only then will we start to identify a better path forward and better strategies. There has to be an investment in Black gay men's movement, leadership, and grassroots organizing, particularly in the South. Often the investment, particularly around leadership in the HIV realm, is often very programmatic or service providers and things like that. But we absolutely need to be investing in Black gay men's grassroots organizing and community organizing. I think what we found with the clinical turn in the HIV realm is that there's just been less resources dedicated to community building and spaces for Black gay men, and those things are really important. Those things are absolutely important. And so, what I think the opportunity there then is for us to really think about how resources are being allocated within for Black gay men to address HIV, and absolutely seeing that leadership development, and not only within large institutions and large aid service organizations, but also in smaller, more grassroots organizations, that investment is important, and that we need movement leadership. It's not just enough to have, trained service providers and really good program coordinators and really, folks that kind of work within these large bureaucracies, but we absolutely need, there's also a value in smaller grassroots organizations, which, I mean, if we look at the history of our movement, we'll see that, a lot of that leadership has come from those kinds of organizations, and we need those spaces too. Finally, we absolutely need to engage diverse stakeholders and thought partners. It's not enough for us to only convene meetings with AIDS Inc. We need to be reaching out to artists, we need to be reaching out to culture workers, we need a diverse set of thought partners from different backgrounds that have something to offer this work. I mean, if we look at the movement history, like the Black Gay Men's Health movement, we know that, our forefathers were poets and artists and cultural workers in the HIV movement, but unfortunately with the clinical turn and the bureaucratization of many of the organizations that serve Black gay men, that, a lot of the poets and artists and cultural workers and innovators have been pushed out, and the kind of expertise that's not only the most valued, but the most affirmed and legitimized is very narrow. And if we don't have our storytellers, if we don't have our artists, if we don't have our innovators, if we don't have folks that have a diverse set of skills beyond a very narrow public health model, then we're not going to see any progress being made. Next slide, please. Next month, the Counter Narrative Project is we're gonna focus on the political response. We're gonna focus on mobilizing a political response around the issues impacting us. We're calling it Black Gay Rage, that's the theme, because ultimately it's not enough to just be sad, it's not enough to just be sort of melancholy or to accept things the way they are. No, we have to fight, we have to resist. So the webinars focus on resilience, this particular webinar, and we're very committed to resilience. We also believe in resistance. And so to just close, I want to offer two quotes. One by Essex Hemphill in his poem For My Own Protection. He says, "If we have to take tomorrow with blood, are we ready?" And the other quote is by G. Winston James from his poem Uprising, where he says, "I want us to shatter the windows of heaven with diamonds." So again, in closing, I believe strongly in the power of Black gay men and our allies to really face the impact of HIV in our communities, and that though there's been tremendous strides made in the medical realm and in the policy realm, we absolutely need a political response to support and to lead the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. We appreciate that. And for individuals, if you do have questions, once again, you can begin to place your questions by using that questions panel, which is on your control panel. Next, we have Aisha McAdams Mahmood. Aisha will be discussing the social science research on resilience among Black gay men. Aisha, I have unmuted you. Can we hear you?
Hi there.
Hey, Aisha. Thank you so much.
No, I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you, Johnny, and Charles, especially for that overview of yesterday's sobering report and that call to diverse and big political action. Much appreciated. Charles really spoke to the collective sadness that may be out there right now, and I know there might be a desire on the part of many of us to respond to this statistical prediction with worry and dread and surrender to what has been presented as an inevitable and devastating future. So I feel like the timing has never been more perfect, actually, for the Counter Narrative Project to offer a space where Black gay men and your allies can celebrate our strengths and practice methods of resistance, in essence, to counter the public health narrative with the individual cultural and story traditions that have made and continue to make us great. So Johnny gave us a beautiful introduction to resilience, and just to translate that into some research terms, quite simply, resilience is defined as an individual's ability to properly adapt to stress and adversity. So resilience research has actually spanned the past 40 years, from anthropology, psychology, to public health, and it suggests that individuals can positively adapt to adverse conditions through resistance, recovery, coping, and adapting to their environments. So this is done through first experiencing risk and activating protective factors, which are interwoven, as many of you know, into the fabric of the lives of Black gay men. They just need to be awakened, and they need to be activated. Much of the public health research on resilience among gay men has been done in the context of HIV prevention, due to the health and social disparities related to the condition, which Charles outlined beautifully, and which Black gay men experience more of when compared to other gay men. But the rest of my presentation will be focused on those protective factors that contribute to resilience. So in the face of people casting so many shadows on the health prospects of Black gay men, what can we turn to? Research actually affirms what the community has known for long before formal research into it began. Our toolkit is rich, a penchant for optimism, high levels of education, the way we centralize Black culture, our social support networks, exposure to diverse cultural and social experiences, our religion and spirituality, regular practice of giving back to others, and the focus of this presentation, artistic creativity such as poetry, design, photography, fashion, and dance. They can all help us protect us from risk and from succumbing to community trauma. Additionally, research has shown us that resilience and resistance through art doesn't just feel good, it actually has real benefits for our physical, emotional, and mental health. So music, dance, and visual arts have been shown to significantly reduce stress, depression, anxiety, as well as helping to control vital signs. They've also been shown to reduce physiological and psychological variables related to pain, increase the perception of comfort, reduce the levels of cortisol, control blood pressure levels, and reduce the length of stay in hospitals. So people who are biologically vulnerable, immunosuppressed, and depressed have benefited immensely from participating in art. Much of this work is being conducted in art therapy, anthropology, performance studies, and to some extent medicine, but more work is needed on this in the public health field. Next slide. So Black American traditions of artistic resistance are not new. We've been using the drum, music, dance, storytelling, and comedy to manage trauma and resist trauma environments since before we were brought to this continent. However, recently these traditions have experienced a cultural reawakening associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. Recently, PBS aired Stanley Nelson's film, The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, wherein protest music and chants such as I'm Black and I'm Proud, Am I Black Enough for You, and All Power to the People were featured as major contributors to the movement. Next slide. A segment of the country lost its collective mind with the release of Beyonce's Formation video and subsequent Super Bowl performance invoking the Black Panthers. Obviously, I'm speaking to the choir. All of us know that the think pieces on this song and video have been seemingly endless in the past few weeks, with everyone debating just how much of a deliberate act of political resistance the song and or video represent. What hasn't really been discussed that I've seen is the erasure of Black gay men in the video, whose bodies are shown grinding in the shadows for 2 seconds, faces hidden, though their talents were used to choreograph the video's iconic dance moves. Next slide. Kendrick Lamar's recent performance on the 2016 Grammy Awards put the precarious social position of many male Black bodies center stage. His song, All Right, has been claimed as an anthem by the Black Lives Matter movement. Next slide. And then finally, Janelle Monáe wrote her own protest anthem recently, Hell You Talking About, also addressing police violence. So I'm going to pause here and just ask, did you guys see anything missing? Where are the Black gay male bodies in the Black Lives Matter movement and in popular culture's embrace of related artistic resistance? And do we even want them there? Why is the first story we've heard that centers Black gay men in the mainstream media about HIV? The final part of this presentation is going to interrogate that reality. What type of work counts as artistic resistance? Does it require outward expression, protest, and forced inclusion? Or is merely existing as a proud queer man in places where you are the minority enough? What exactly are Black gay men supposed to be resisting against with their art? Does more popularity or recognition of one's action or art equal a more valuable resistance contribution? Is the fact that the terms like yes and what's the tea and bye Felicia and other examples of Black gay male vernacular have entered the mainstream channels evidence of social acceptance or evidence of widespread misappropriation? Specifically, how can we speak the names and actively use the robust work of gay Black male artists as opportunities for restorative justice? How can we support, build capacity for, evaluate, and bring to scale the amazing artistic work being done by community organizations and art centers throughout the country, such as the Southwest Art Center in Atlanta, Black Gifted and Whole Charity, or Harold Stewart's Performing Arts Exchange by South Arts in Dallas, Texas? As the podcasts of folks like Kid Furry and the YouTube channels of folks like Trey Melvin gain popularity and bring us life by epitomizing Black gay joy, can and should we look to them and others as symbols of Black gay male resistance? How can their products be used as tools for healing? When we see Andre Leon Talley and the visual art of Jonathan L. Chase, such as his painting That John, do we claim them as representatives of an artistic renaissance? Finally, how can we have more community discussions comparing the work of Marlon Riggs' plays and plays of Terrell Alvin McCraney to one another, and think about how they can be used as tools for healing? So just to close, I hope we remember that resilience and artistic resistance are not disparate concepts. Narrative traditions and reading aren't distant cousins. And our artistic and personal expressions are not just personal. They are political, and they must be expanded on a large platform to build collective memory. These traditions make us smile. They give us life. We have to use them as tools on a community level to promote our health. This community's protective factors are rich and abundant. They are interwoven into the very fabric of our expression, and they have real health effects. They just need to be awakened or activated on a community level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aisha, for that presentation. And our next presenter is going to be Brian Glover. Brian is going to take us beyond resilience. We're going to talk about resilience, thriving, and liberation. Brian, do I have you here?
Yes, thank
All
you.
right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you so much, Johnny, and Charles. Really honored to be asked to present. And yes, in light of the information from yesterday, I'm still absorbing that in light of Charles's presentation, and thinking about what I'm going to talk about, because there's a sense of urgency I feel right now. But I think, what I really want to do is to pick up and talk about where Aisha left off in terms of art and resistance. And first I want to talk about resilience. Resilience, in a lot of the language recently, resilience has been talked about as it's been mainly recovering from trauma. And a lot of the research I've looked at in a lot of the strategies to address resilience looking at strategies that we can teach communities. And this is thinking about resilience as a bouncing back or a coming back to normal, or I did like the note that resilience brings people back stronger than ever. But the thing about resilience, if we look at resilience and looking at calling communities resilient, it's really about how we live now and our coping strategies. And our coping strategies can sometimes be good, but sometimes bad, right? It depends on what coping strategy we have. So, if, for example, an individual has a coping strategy that allows them to live a life that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Allows them to live a life that is not, there's a word I'm trying to think of here, I can't think of it. But so if one lives a life where they are going to work every day and, able to live a life where they have a family and put themselves together, they can still have a lot of challenges in their life, such as alcoholism and things that would not be so good that are coping strategies. Resilience usually talks about how we live now, and I think of it in some ways as a status quo, because resilience talks about the ways that communities are, and they don't move us to a point of thriving. And so the research has shown that resilience is ordinary and not extraordinary, in that it's a trait that involves thoughts and behaviors and actions that can be learned and developed by anyone. But I am interested in how we get from resilience to actually creating lives where we are thriving and contributing to community and creating. And this gets to what would be thriving. So I think for me, in looking at some of the work that I've done, telling our stories is important. And it's not, so the relationship between art and activism is not a small one, because every day when a person wakes up in the morning, they are living a particular story. And the question becomes, is that story, where did that story come from? Is that story from someone else? Is that story from you? Is that story serving the life you want to create for yourself? And so I'm interested in looking at thriving and moving resilience from not something that is brought into communities from the outside, but an inner resource that allows them to survive and thrive in spite of their circumstances. And this is often done in community as we begin to share our stories with each other and witnessing each other's stories, and then beginning to tell new stories, to realize that sometimes some of our stories are not of our own making, that we can actually revive stories, that we have the power to change stories, that we have the power to tell new stories. And that is where something, for example, this is where what's exciting for me about the Counter-Narrative Project, because it's about countering traditional narratives, telling new stories that allow people to feel empowered. That's something Aishan's referenced, that the powerful healing of art is when one can recognize one's sense of self, one's agency, and one's ability to not only tell a new story of where they've been, but to tell new stories of what's possible. Next slide, please. So for me, liberation is about telling new stories and envisioning new worlds. And it taps into individual and communities' abilities to begin to change the way they see themselves and what's possible. A lot of the movement that happened, one of the things that's interesting to me is a lot of the movement that happened in 1986 was a pivotal year, 30 years ago, because that was the year that, for example, ADOTI was founded, which is a national organization that covers retreats for Black gay men. Gay Men of African Descent was founded in that year, and Other Countries was founded in that year, which is a writers collective. And all of these organizations were, as Charles indicated, populated by people who wrote poetry, who wrote plays, who told stories, actors. There was no division between the living of lives, the telling of stories, and the call for action, and the marching in the streets, in the parades, visibility. All of this was part of a communal process of waking up and claiming space, and that is related to storytelling, in my opinion. So when we talk about practices such as arts, poetry, dance, I like to tell people to think about, so like, poetry is simply an act of writing down a feeling or thought, and poetry can also become prose, which can become essays or novels, and inspire people with your stories, inspire people by telling your story and connecting with other people who see something similar. So that when someone reads, when someone who doesn't have as much access to community, they can read a poem or a story and feel a certain sense of kinship and have their own interior space motivated to action and to seeking out connection with community. I even think, for example, that painting, sculpture, those are sites of stories, because when we view art, we are moved to think of our own history and story in a particular kind of way, and move to re-examine it sometimes, and sometimes then move toward action. Next slide, please. So I think, and I'll wrap it up soon for other people to chime in here, but there's a lot of contemporary examples of art that has created space. So if you, for example, if you think about something even like house music, which was created a space for people to come and be free. So the thing about house music is that house music, which was germinated in the Black gay community, it wasn't just about going to the club and dancing. It was also about going to this particular space that was carved out where people could go and express their joy and express their freedom to congregate and claim a space. And those sites, when they're claimed, can then be sites for connection, networking, mobilizing, and action. So I think I'll give some historical examples, such as if we go back to even James Baldwin or Langston Hughes, Black men who were telling stories and looking at race in society and giving the world a new way to envision the relationship between different people, and also the response that is required when those stories are in the world. So, for example, when we think about Beyonce's video, there's been a lot of talk and commentary on about what it means and whether or not it's actually liberating. But the fact that I contend that, I think it definitely is open to critique, but it is definitely putting a new story out there. That's the importance, I think, of telling stories. One thing I want to point out as I wrap up is, if you look at someone like DeRay McKesson, who's running for mayor of Baltimore, so not about him himself, but the moment of a DeRay McKesson, the possibility that a Black gay 30-year-old can run for mayor of a major American city, is something that didn't come out of a vacuum. It's something that exists because of the history that came before it. And that history was shaped by, not only by, for example, Ken Reeves, who was mayor of Cambridge, but it was shaped by the communities that contributed to writing the stories and shaping the history and the environment into which DeRay McKesson was born and then acts out into the world. I think that I'm going to end there. I was going to read a few poems, but we're running short on time. So I think I'll wrap up, and looking forward to seeing what the questions are.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brian. I have gone ahead, and all of our panelists should be unmuted at this point. I want to go ahead and thank all of you for participating. And I do have a few questions, and then we'll open it up to our our participants as well. So if you are interested and have a question based on what has been shared, you can put that in the question panel and we will address that question towards the end of our conversation. So during this question and answer panel, I do have a few questions that we'll talk about, panelists. I do encourage you to keep your comments succinct as we want to make sure that we have enough time to address anything our participants would like to cover. So my first question. So Paulo Freire states that we can legitimately say that in the process of oppression, someone in the process of oppression, someone oppresses someone else. We cannot say that in the process of revolution that someone liberates someone else, nor yet that someone liberates himself, but rather that human beings in communion liberate each other. So I'm going to read that last part again. Human beings in communion liberate each other. So let's bring that into our discussion about resilience. Is resilience something that can be taught? And if so, how and who's part of teaching those lessons? So any of our panelists can jump into this portion.
Well, I think Paulo Freire is a great example. I'm so glad that you read a quote from him in particular. His theater of the oppressed and just understanding the importance that art plays to both pedagogy and revolution is central. But I think we also just have to look to our elders and our contemporaries who have overcome. Each of us are practicing survival every day. Resilience is about surviving in optimal health and using your internal and community resources to do so. So yes, it can be taught, but it's really less so about teaching you a new skill and more so about activating the assets and the strengths that you already have.
Mm-hmm.
This is Brian. I wonder if it can be taught or if resilience, I'm beginning to think of it more as a quality, and that really, as I look at resilience coming from within, that what can be facilitated for people is creating the conditions for resilience and the resources for resilience. I'm wondering if I'm beginning to think that resilience itself, not that it's such an individual thing, but it happens in community, but it's because the community creates the environment for someone to thrive and be resilient.
Great. Charles, any thoughts from you?
I feel like Brian Aisha covered it pretty good. Ditto to what they said.
So I think this is a good kind of segue because what we just discussed is that our communities play a significant role in teaching Black gay men resilience. So let's talk about our organizations, because we have organizations that exist within our communities and individuals that work with Black gay men. What types of things can these organizations and individuals consider today that could impact many of our brothers to rise? Essentially, what I'm asking is, what programmatic strategies can be implemented right now to help with resilience?
I'll take it. Charles Stevens here. I would say three things. One, to channel my good friend Aisha and all her brilliance, they need to figure out what are the sacred spaces for Black gay men. What's sacred to us? Like, what are our sacred spaces? And build programming on those sacred spaces. If it's an actual physical space, if it's a virtual space, is it a creative space? Is it a personal space? But figure out what those sacred spaces are and build programming around those sacred spaces. And by sacred, I don't mean the church. So it could be, but, the sacred can mean obviously more than that. So I just want to bring that. The second thing is, and it's kind of connected to the first thing, is just listen and pay attention and ask. I feel like a lot of times okay, I'm not going to critique, but I'm just going to say that there's an opportunity in just paying attention and listening to the stories that Black gay men tell about their lives and their experiences, and really look to those stories to provide guidance about the kinds of programming and mobilization that should happen, the kinds of policy priorities and the kinds of programmatic interventions and things like that. I think there's a tremendous opportunity there. And three, and it's I guess a four-part response with three, but I would say, have a house music conversation or a house music mobilization event. Like Black gay men, especially Black gay men over 40, it's like they have a very special and sacred relationship to house music. I think if you want to engage and it could be intergenerational event, but like I think there's an opportunity to build community around that. I would say, so that's A. B, I would say, have a writer in residence or have an artist residency. Especially like large organizations with lots of core funding and things like that, unrestricted funding. I think it would be amazing to bring the artist in residence there to engage the community stakeholders around art and these issues. The dominant narrative of our experiences cannot just be rooted in empiricism and quantitative statistics. Like, we have to have other ways to describe and narrate our experiences beyond numbers. I'm not saying that the data isn't useful and valuable as a way to depict our experiences, but it cannot be the only way. We need art, we need stories, we need these other kinds of ways of talking about our experiences. Otherwise, our subjectivities will continue to be flattened into these very, simplistic and disempowering kinds of narratives. So have an artist in residency. And C, 3C, I would suggest, having innovative community partnerships. Like, I think that the partnership model has worked well within the HIV realm, like within AIDS service organizations, but partner with a local movie theater and have a film festival. Like, we have to be more innovative about how we engage and reach Black gay men. We can no longer continue to use the same methods of trying to do outreach, of trying to reach out, of trying to build community. We need to absolutely be innovative. And so I think programmatically, the opportunity is to try to find and identify unconventional ways to build partnerships across different kinds of organizations as a way to try to do something different, try to reach out. I mean, I think we're so numb to these statistics that they happen, and everybody's like, well, there's no surprise there, no one's surprised. And I mean, and we may or may not be surprised, but we shouldn't be disempowered, we shouldn't be passive. So I think the only way to do that, to really stir us, to wake us up from this numbness, that statistics do, like I think that's the function of numbers, they just kind of numb you to death with statistics, is that and the only thing that can wake us up is art and culture and our stories, and I think that is the challenge for us. Thank you.
Thanks, Charles. Anybody else would like to chime in on programmatic strategies that can be implemented right now to help our brothers rise?
I think Charles dropped the mic on that one.
Yeah, I agree.
I'd like to really underscore that idea of an artist in residence. I like that not only does it contribute to the formation of new stories, but then the presentation of the art, one, demonstrates for people the power of storytelling, and it brings people together in community when the stories are shared.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Brian. I do want to, I have one final question that I would like to ask, and then we have a couple of questions from some individuals who are attending. So my final question is, we've talked a lot about media and storytelling during this conversation. Let's bring that in personally a bit. Can each of you, everyone doesn't have to answer, but can you reflect on a time when something that you read or saw or experienced taught you a lesson in resilience in retrospect?
Oh, this is Brian. Yes, I have a story I like to tell, which for me was a pivotal moment in terms of me seeing media that made a difference in my life, which was the first time I saw the film Tongues Untied, Marlon Riggs' Tongues Untied film at the Art Institute of Chicago, I believe. I was in college. It must have been 1988, 89. I can't remember the year exactly. But the film screened, and you hear the beginning, brother, and just a dark room, and this comes on the screen, and it was probably the first time in my life that I felt art was made by me, featured me, and was there for me. And so I felt like really, I went alone, and I felt like I was really the only person that mattered in the room. And that was probably the moment that sparked my subsequent career as an arts manager and arts producer. So I have a very, personal story about the power of media to change my life.
Thank you so much, Brian. Anyone else?
I've had so many experiences, it's hard to narrow it down. I grew up in Georgia, in Atlanta, and, my daddy was a preacher. I had a very typical Black gay boyhood in the South. I was bullied. I had all these kinds of things. I thought I was going to hell for only a minute. I was going to hell for a minute for being gay. So I had all those sorts of experiences that a lot of us have. But it really was through, I think the first experience I had was probably, I remember reading, I'll say two things. The first thing is this anthology, Brother to Brother, edited by Essex Hemphill. I remember I had come out publicly when I was about 18, and I came out on TV on the local news because I decided to be the spokesperson for this Queer Youth March that year. For some reason, I thought, basically on Monday, I decided I was going to come out, and on Tuesday, I decided to be a spokesperson for this Queer Youth March. It happened really fast, it was all in 1 week. And if for some reason, I didn't think that everybody in Atlanta watched the local news. So here I am on Channel 2, 5, and 11, talking about, the silencing of queer youth of color or whatever, and everybody saw it. And I was not prepared for the response that I got. And I had this moment of, oh my God, what did I just do? What the hell? And and then one day, and I just picked up Brother to Brother, and I started reading the introduction, and that's what gave me strength to continue on. And that was really, because, I was kind of at a crossroads. I was like, am I going to have this very public life, or am I going to just assimilate as much as I can assimilate and be quiet and just kind of get along? But I decided to continue to fight. And the other piece of my resilience really was the stories of Southern Black gay men. Southern Black gay men that passed the torch to me, that encouraged me, that nurtured me, that affirmed me, that challenged me, that pissed me off. All those experiences, the good and the bad, I love these men. And so much of my work, all of my work really, has everything to do with, the Black gay men in Atlanta, in Georgia, that I was like the freshman at the senior table, largely. And just to have this tradition of brothers and, pro-feminist, radical around class politics, to just speak life into me and to just take care of me. And I don't want to romanticize it. There were hard parts too. I think I've also had my heart broken often. So they weren't perfect. These experiences weren't perfect, but they still, I think, inspired and instilled in me the value for service, for social justice, for resilience and resistance. And I'll be grateful to those folks.
Excellent. Aisha, any thoughts before I open it up to our attendees?
Now let's get to the attendees.
All right, excellent. Thank you. So, we have a few questions that have, a couple of questions rather, that have come in. We're actually going to start with Corey Bradley. Corey asks, he's interested in understanding more around Black gay rage. Where does the campaign determine rage is to be directed, and who or what will be the target of our rage? So Charles, I'm going to address that to you.
Hey, Corey. Oh, yeah, I should actually say Corey inspired the hashtag because he used it, and I borrowed it without asking him first. So thank you, Corey.
Thanks, Corey.
He's like, that looks familiar. Yes, Corey, I actually took the hashtag that you used. Sorry, I should have asked you first. Targets, honestly, we're figuring it out. We're figuring it out. It's not a campaign in the traditional sense. It's just more it's more of a theme. So we see ourselves not as running a campaign, we see ourselves as curators. So what we want to do is identify content, artistic, substantive content that we can use, and also messaging that we can kind of plug into it. I think we're very open to thinking about some of the traditional, but it's not, there aren't like targets and institutions, and we're not trying to have impact on institutions kind of thing. But we just want a way to kind of, and it's also like not so much a campaign in the sense of having impact. We want to ask some questions like, should we be angry? Like, should Black gay men be enraged? It seems like we should be mad. It feels like, I don't know if we are mad at some of the institutions. So I think that it's something that's developing. Again, we don't see Black Gay Rage as a campaign in the traditional sense, although it might lead to a campaign. Like, hopefully what happened is that if we're able to kind of harness the power of our stakeholders, then we can develop a campaign, not so much called Black Gay Rage. The campaign would be to actually try to change some policy or try to reform some institutions. So it'll probably become more traditional. But yeah, let's be in conversation about it. If folks want to be involved, let me know. But again, the function of the hashtag is more curatorial than like traditional campaign advocacy.
Thank you so much, Charles. Our next question from Kipper Jones. Thank you for your comment about the music component. What might the artist in residency look like?
I think that the artists I think that we should create. I think that organizations should create a space for artists to do work. They could teach some workshops. They could maybe convene a discussion or two. But they should also be able to do their work. There's so much money that a lot of these organizations have that don't really make it. There's so much money that a lot of organizations have that's supposed to go to Black gay men, but it really doesn't. And I always do this thing around, like, I know a lot of Black gay artists that are like literally starving, and I just feel like, no, they should be able to have artistic residencies at a lot of these organizations and institutions, so they can do their work, and so they can like have a platform, and most importantly, so they can help inform the programmatic agenda of the institution. I think it would be phenomenal if a songwriter or a singer or a visual artist or a dancer, choreographer, actor, whatever, could be able to just have an office at a community organization, maybe do some programmatic work there. Most importantly, do their own work, do their own projects. But I think it could be, and like I said, most importantly, infuse their creativity and innovation in the programmatic direction of the organization.
I think that also goes both ways, though, Charles. I think as much as it would benefit the artist and definitely the organization, it's definitely mutually beneficial in the sense that artists by nature are isolated. They create their work in isolation. These community organizations have the capacity and have the reach and the resources to actually connect people to their work. And so there's tremendous opportunity for artists to be connected with bigger audiences, for fashion designers to somehow weave in concepts into ad campaigns that never would have been conceived of previously. So there's a lot of opportunity.
Love that. And I think the audience engagement will be amazing, like to be able to expand the audience, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think also it allows the organizations, a lot of times they call on artists for their product, right? Come and sing a song at this event. But it would allow the organizations to really take an interest more in the artists' lives and livelihood rather than just get them to come and do a song often for free, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Thank you.
I think if you want to save Black gay men's lives, then you need to. You can't do that without art. You cannot save. You need PrEP and you need treatment and you need access to healthcare, but you also need art. And I think we need to message around that. Like, we need art and artists to be a part of this.
Excellent.
And other, certainly other vulnerable communities too, but.
Awesome. And our final comment comes from Ramon Johnson. And his comment is, and I think this is going to be interesting because I know that a lot of individuals struggle with this, but he said, Jamal Lewis really sparked a sense of urgency in me to document and record our lived experiences as Black gay men. However, I'm still struggling to access the tools to do so in an effective way. I'd like for our panelists to weigh in on what are some ways that individuals can take what they have now and begin to document and record our experiences.
Mm. Well, I think there's no time like the present simply because of the tools, the very affordable tools that are at our reach for documentation purposes. Everybody who has access to a smartphone technology or can hop on the internet right now and open a YouTube channel themselves can start to create digital stories, can start to record their own voices, can start to find their own voice memos and just have a stockpile of them. I think that your point is so key in terms of us not only having personal storage of our memory, but having collective memory and somehow, making that a restorative piece. I think everybody should keep a journal. Everybody should keep a calendar. These are really simple things, but and those things I've mentioned in isolation, but when you start to also share those things with other people, you free other people to do the same thing. So this is only powerful. Your art is only useful if it is shared. Art is a gift meant to be shared with other people. And so as much as it can be healing for the individual, once you get through that and you get over whatever hump you're going through, make sure that you open it up and share whatever worked for you.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comments before I begin to wrap up? Excellent. Thank you so much. So I want to thank our panelists once again for joining us. I'd like to leave us with a quote from Joseph Beam. I dare myself to dream of us moving from survival to potential, from merely getting by to a positive getting over. I dream of Black men loving and supporting other Black men. This quote is a reminder for all of us that our ability to rise from the ashes not only requires resilience, but support and love for one another. As we return to our work, as we return to our silos, as we return to creating for many of us, remember that our ability to positively get over takes each and every one of us. So I want to thank everyone who attended our webinar today and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much.